Welcome back, students. Donald Trump is back in the news, just like every day, this time with threats against our European brothers and sisters. I chose this article from France 24, a very good source, and I think you're going to learn a lot of new vocabulary about the situation. Let's try to understand it like a native speaker. Trump tariff threats over Greenland prompt calls for unprecedented EU countermeasures. There's a lot here that I'd like to talk about. The first word is over, and this is a word that I mention so many times on this channel, and it means a lot of different things. In this case, we can just think of over as about, or even the word regarding. So, Trump tariff threats about Greenland, or regarding Greenland, prompt or cause calls for unprecedented EU countermeasures. This word unprecedented just means something was never seen before, or it's something really new, really never before seen, or never seen before. You can say both. But let's look at the pronunciation. Donald Trump is the President of the United States. And with the word president, there's a clear Z sound when we pronounce it. President, president. But with the word precedent, there is an S sound. Precedent. So Donald Trump is the president, and here we have a precedent. So one more time, unprecedented EU countermeasures. When you are saying EU, the European Union, don't pronounce this too fast. I often see this with some students who pronounce this, CEO, which stands for Chief Executive Officer. Sometimes my students will say CEO, CEO, and it sounds like CEO, CEO, and that's not really the way we pronounce it. We try to pronounce every letter in these acronyms. So CEO. And in this one, European Union, EU, which sounds like this. EU, like the word you, EU. EU countermeasures. When we see the word measures in this type of situation, it really means just actions. It's very simple. They use a lot of different vocabulary when writing news articles, but really just actions. So counter means against, to retaliate, to counter, counter measures, counter actions. Of course, against Donald Trump. French president with a Z sound, French President Emmanuel Macron will ask the EU to activate its anti-coercion measure, dubbed its trade bazooka, for the first time ever, if US President Donald Trump follows through with threats to impose new tariffs on European countries for opposing his plans for Greenland. An extraordinary meeting of EU ambassadors has been called for Sunday afternoon in Brussels. There's a lot of information here, but first let's look at the word coercion. Coercion. Coercion is, I believe, a legal term. We usually see this in legal writing and or legal conversations, of course. And this just means when you force someone to do something. So this is its anti-coercion measure, its action, because of course the United States is putting pressure on the European Union to give it Greenland, something again that I disagree with. This coercion measure was dubbed or let's say called. And dubbed is more specific. It's given a name. Okay, so they invented this name. It's trade bazooka. Now, I'm sure you know what a bazooka is. I think this word is the same in almost every language. It's that big gun that you fire and there's an explosion. So a trade bazooka. For the first time ever, if Donald Trump follows through with threats. So Donald Trump, let's look at this phrasal verb. I love phrasal verbs because they help you speak like a native speaker. Follow through with. We have a lot of parts here. So, follow, right? I drove to the movie theater and my friend followed me in his car, right? Follow. And then we have the word through. Now remember, through, I think of tunnels. I always think of tunnels from point A to point B. And we often follow through with plans to do something. Okay, so remember, point A, we start the idea, we get the plan, and then we go through the tunnel. But if you go through a tunnel, sometimes there's an accident or there's traffic or something like that, and you stop. So maybe we can imagine your plans are canceled, right? So your plans are stopped. You didn't follow through the tunnel with your plans. But if you reach point B, if you go all the way through the tunnel to point B, you follow your plan through the tunnel. You arrive at the end. And that's the meaning of follow through with something. You create a plan or action, you go through the tunnel, and you arrive at the end. You finish your plan. You complete your plan. And another way to describe follow through with is to do what was promised. So again, related to plans or promises, something like that. Very useful phrasal verb. Follow through with your plans or actions. So Donald Trump usually chickens out. There's a name given to Donald Trump. It's Taco. And this stands for Trump always chickens out. Now, if you watch my channel quite frequently, you know that chicken out means to run away, to not do something because you're scared. So some people think that Trump always chickens out, meaning he says something and then he runs away. So the opposite would be if Trump follows through with these threats. What threats? To impose. Again, to force. To impose is very similar to force, like I said, but we can say to impose tariffs. This is a collocation. They go together. So impose is not a word that I use every day in my normal conversations, but when you're talking about tariffs, it's very common. So to force tariffs on someone. Now let's think again like a native speaker. To impose means to force. And uh, with impose, we use the preposition on. So to impose tariffs on, let's say someone, like the EU, for example. We also have to force tariffs on someone. The same preposition, on. Now, we normally wouldn't use force with tariffs, but these are just examples. A more common expression with tariffs is to put tariffs, what's the preposition? On someone or something. We can also do something. So you can see all of these patterns in English. It's really very similar. So it's very important to recognize these patterns. So if Trump follows through with threats to impose new tariffs on European countries, for what reason? For opposing his plans on Greenland. An extraordinary meeting of EU ambassadors has been called for Sunday afternoon in Brussels. Here we have the combination call for. And I've mentioned this phrasal verb many times again on my channel. I recommend that you go watch my videos, of course, but we can make a sentence. For example, Trump posted on, let's say, Twitter, and called for new tariffs on the EU. Just an example sentence. So he announced, he called for what? For new tariffs. So here we have in our article, called for. But we're talking about a meeting which has been called or announced, and then we have another idea. We have the idea of time. So for when. This meaning is different than when you call for tariffs on something, or when Donald Trump does that. Here we have for what time, for when, for Sunday afternoon. So you can see that call for can change because context is everything in English. So we can say Trump called for new tariffs on the EU, or the ambassadors, a meeting has been called for Sunday afternoon in Brussels. So it's different. It can also mean time. Remember, if you're looking for a professional teacher, I am available all the time, almost every day. This is my website, and if you're interested, you can visit it. You can read about me, schedule your first lesson, or read about my certifications. On the front page, there's a lot of information, and you can see that I have a little description on the bottom, including my experience in Costa Rica, Latin America, and experience with students from Brazil, Spain, Korea, Germany, China, Italy, and so many other countries. I'm the most international American that I personally know. Right now, I work with a lot of Russian speakers, a lot of Slavic speakers, Ukrainian speakers, people from Central Asia, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, even Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, and others. So if you're interested, schedule your first lesson. Let's continue. France's President Emmanuel Macron will ask the European Union to activate its powerful anti-coercion instrument if the United States imposes additional tariffs in the standoff over Greenland, his team said Sunday. Here's the word over again, and from the beginning of the lesson, we know that over sometimes means about. But here we have another word, standoff. Let's think of this one. I love thinking of words and breaking them down so we can understand them. So we have two parts. We have stand and we have off. And we have two different people in this. We have Trump and we have Macron, or we have the United States and the European Union. And they are kind of fighting, right? They're arguing. So when you have two different people or two different organizations, something, and they're fighting, they're separate. They're separate parties. So you can, if you remember from my previous lessons, off often means separation. So here we can imagine that the two parties are standing and there's separation between them. So a standoff is something where no side agrees on what's happening. This is very common when you're negotiating with someone, for example. But you'll also find this in some action movies between the good guys and the bad guys. So there's a standoff, there's no progress, and the two sides cannot agree. So a situation where no side agrees. And this is a standoff. If you've been reading the news about Greenland, it's just ridiculous, honestly. Another nightmare. The bloc's weapon, never before used and dubbed its trade bazooka, allows for curbing imports of goods and services. It has been invoked as a possible way to push back over tech and trade. And now the Danish territory US President Donald Trump wants to acquire. The bloc is a group of countries in this situation. We really don't use this word very often, but it's very common when discussing the European Union. We remember dubbed, so a name given, which is bazooka in this case. And then we have to curb, which I'll just tell you is to limit. To limit imports of goods and services, products and services. It has been invoked or activated. And we can form, of course, the word to invoke. That's the verb. So it has been invoked, it has been activated as a possible way to push back. Remember, if you have one force pushing in one direction, Donald Trump, he likes to push, okay? There needs to be some resistance that meets his force. So they're pushing back, and that creates a standoff. So they're pushing back. There's resistance. To push back against someone, to create resistance, or to resist. You can also say that. We also have in the article push back over. This is new, but this is a way to modify the verb. Again, we remember over means about. This is very frequent. It's more formal when we use it in this way, but very frequent, especially in news articles. Trump on Saturday vowed to implement a wave of rising tariffs on European allies until the United States is allowed to purchase Greenland. Have you ever been to a wedding? If you have, then you remember that the bride and the groom promise to be together forever. They give their vows, their wedding vows. To vow is to promise, but it's a very official, formal type of promise. So Trump vowed to implement a wave of rising tariffs, a very extreme situation. He promised in a very formal way. It was a very extreme promise. In a post on Truth Social, Trump said 10% tariffs would come into effect on February 1st on Denmark, Norway, Sweden, France, Germany, Great Britain, the Netherlands, and Finland. Those tariffs would increase to 25% on June 1st and would continue until a deal is reached for the United States to undertake the complete and total purchase of Greenland, Trump said. Tariffs would come into effect. And when we say come into effect, it's another collocation. We can just say take effect or begin. Take effect is another collocation, very common when you have an implementation of something. So Trump on Saturday vowed to implement a wave of rising tariffs, and those tariffs would come into effect or take effect on February 1st. Some people are starting to say February 1. I've been hearing this a little more and more in American English, but remember the traditional way that we talk about or use in our conversation is February 1st. The same with June 1st. Some people might say June 1. We understand you, but the traditional American way, I'm not sure about the British, but the way we say it is June 1st. And we have just one more word here, which is undertake. To undertake the complete and total purchase of Greenland. And undertake just means start to do something. It's, again, another formal word. You're going to see new vocabulary in these news articles. not very common in typical conversation between people, unless you are summarizing a news article. So we normally don't use these words in conversation, but it's very important to understand them like a native speaker when you see them. So that's all today, just one article. Let's hope that things calm down a little bit more. Um, but I hope you enjoyed the article, and I'll see you in the next lesson.